All right, what we can do, if you're
We
still
do
having,
have his intro in the chat. He did introduce himself in the chat.
perfect,
So,
okay. Thanks,
yeah.
Ed. So let me do this. What I would, if, oh, we just had a phone number join. Oh, now it's gone. Ed, if you'd like, we will be able to capture all of your feedback using the tools that we have. If you don't want to continue trying to mess with your audio, if you if you want to try it out though, feel free to exit the breakout room. And that will direct you back to the main room where Wendy is, and she can help you try to troubleshoot. Those are my two ideas. I apologize that we're having this issue. But for now, I want to go ahead and get into our actual activities. So what I'm going to do is some quick sort of overview of what we're going to be talking about. Keep in mind that all of the information that I'm showing now is in the slides that we shared the link to with you all. So you have this for reference as well. Thanks, Rob. And we can come back to this at any time. So the kinds of assets that we'll be talking about today include affordable housing, particular types of affordable housing, the sewer treatment plant, public safety and emergency operations buildings, and then a whole host of other types of buildings, which includes hospitals, colleges and universities, public schools, and you can read the list all the way down to private buildings, such as businesses. Um, keep in mind, again, this is a lot. And so what we're going to be doing is walking through this activity together so that we can get through as much as possible today and keeping this pretty high level. And any additional feedback that you want to provide, you'll be able to do so either in the survey tool, which I'm going to share with you now. It's on my screen, but I will put in the chat. Or we can meet with you one-on-one after this if you prefer that. So what I just put in the chat is the link to a SurveyMonkey tool that we want everyone to please open and keep open during our discussion. If we were not under COVID restrictions right now, we would be doing this in a room with a big table, lots of maps, big pieces of paper and Post-its and stickers and all kinds of stuff. So we are trying to make do with the digital tools that we have, and SurveyMonkey will be how we collect the majority of your feedback. In addition to that, again, we have Daniel taking notes, and I will be also taking notes today. So the tool, the SurveyMonkey tool itself, is split into 3 sections that we'll go through together. And the first one, just on the first, once you get past the introductory page, is the sensitivity section. And what we're going to do with this is think about our 2 categories of threats, heat and water, and go through the list of our assets and think about together and individually how those threats could potentially impact those assets. And again, with sensitivity, we're thinking about how much or to what extent a particular asset type might be impacted by that threat. We don't have to get into specifics right now or at all during this discussion about, well, how hot is it, really going to get, or, what kind of flood are we talking about? Let's just think in more general terms. So I'm actually going to stop sharing, and what I'll do is bring up the shared screen anytime we want to look at where an asset is, or come back to any of our terms of reference as far as the assets and the parts of the assessment that we're doing together. What I did want to share as well is a link to a mapping tool that we've developed to help with certain pieces of this if you all are interested in looking at it. Again, we know this is a lot, so only open it if you would like to. But this, I'm going to mute the phone number that just came in, and that might be you. There we go. So if you look at the mapping tool, and I'll actually share my screen just so you all can follow along with me. What we have at the bottom are widgets that show the different kinds of climate impacts that we're talking about. So you can see where the cities, for example, urban heat islands are. Some of these data layers are pretty heavy, so it might take a minute for them to load. You can also look at what we're considering in terms of flooding scenarios, such as the floodplains. Most importantly, though, are these last two widgets. Well, actually, for this group, we only want this one, the pink buildings and infrastructure widget. So this has a list of most of the assets that we're talking about today. So if at any point you want to explore, well, how many of this kind of thing does Richmond actually have, or where are these located? Just to give you a general sense of how these things might be impacted by climate change, feel free to click on one. So for example, I don't know what's a good, here we go, hospitals. So you can see these little marks pop up. You can click on them for more information if you'd like. This is only here for your reference. What we want you to concentrate on right now is the survey tool, which has the primary considerations at the top. So we're talking about sensitivity. And then what we're going to be doing right now is walking through scoring for each type of asset and how we think it might be impacted by, first we'll talk about heat. So jumping right in, and you all feel free to chime in with questions. I'm trying to keep the chat open. But with heat, we know the reason we separated the two types of threats is because obviously they impact assets really differently. With heat, we are not going to be experiencing, most likely, at least for the next, century, temperatures that impact Richmond to the point where we have things melting. That is a reality for some parts of the country, particularly like in the Southwest, where they have issues with paving materials melting during heat waves and things like that. We will not be experiencing heat to that extent that we know of for now. And so what we want to think about when it comes to heat is just generally, is there any potential threat to these types of built assets because of something like an incredibly hot day? We're talking like 110 degrees or more, or an extended heat wave where we have temperatures above 95 degrees for 3 or more days. And so what we ask you to do now is to think about heat as a threat, and then go through and relative to sort of each other, think about these assets and whether any of them could be affected by heat. And I will just leave it at that and open it up for any questions or thoughts as you all fill in that first part of the activity. And then we'll move on to water. So just checking in, does that make sense to everyone? Do you have, what we're asking you to do right now is go to the SurveyMonkey tool, first page under sensitivity, look at the list of assets under heat threats, and just think about whether any of these might be affected because of high temperatures and heat waves. Any questions? No? Okay. The faces I can see are studious, so I'm assuming you all are looking at this tool, which is great. Thanks, Ed. I will be here to move us along as we need to, but I encourage you all, if you want to talk through any of the specifics of this, to please voice your thoughts. I'll also lastly note that there is a comment section under each of the sections we will be talking through today. So feel free to put any additional thoughts there, or if it's easier, just say them out loud or put them in the chat. We will capture them however you share them with us. And I will give you all, if you prefer, quiet work time, about 5 minutes to think about heat and sensitivity with these assets.
You know, one thing that just popped into my head was, are we also taking into account the extreme heat plus extreme humidity as well, considering Virginia is typically very humid as well as hot?
Yeah, I think that kind of goes hand in hand here. We don't tend to get the dry heat that other parts of the country get.
Mm-hmm.
So good question, Daniel. I do not have enough knowledge to know if that impacts things differently than just heat.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, feel free to y'all include that in your thoughts as you're going through this. I'll give you all just a couple more minutes on the sensitivity to heat part, um, if you'd like them. And if you are ready, feel free to move on to the water threats. I will give a little bit more quiet time and then go into what exactly that is again. All right, so just in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and talk through the next section, which is still thinking about sensitivity of assets, but now we're thinking about water threats, which to me poses probably more of an actual threat than heat to the assets that we're looking at in this group. So with water, we are thinking about all things related to both extreme precipitation, most likely in the form of rain, which can cause flooding, with sea level rise, again, sort of worked into that um, sort of scenario as it may impact the level of the James River. So with these threats, be thinking about how an asset, one of these built or infrastructure assets, might be impacted by whether it's just a deluge of rain. We have seen over the last several years several unprecedented rain events in terms of the amount of precipitation that falls in a given time, as well as flooding. And so this doesn't have to be a catastrophic flood necessarily, but be thinking about, okay, most of these are buildings. If they become flooded, what is the level of sort of sensitivity to that threat? And then we'll be moving on to thinking about adaptive capacity, but want to open it up for any questions and discussion now about these assets and their potential sensitivity to water threats.
Water, threats or anything taken into account, potential erosion impacts from flood events or post-flood events?
Yeah, I think so. Sort of like we're thinking water and all the stuff that happens because of it. So,
Mm-hmm.
flooding, general degradation of land, things like that. Could be, flooding accompanied with a bunch of stuff that comes into the water and gets dragged along towards an asset, something along those
Yeah,
lines.
and I'm sure that probably also includes, impacts to groundwater or,
Right.
that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, did you just join us from the other group? Just checking in. Cool. Okay,
I
so
did, yeah.
let me put this in the chat. our survey tool, which is different from the one that the energy group is working on. In this group, we're looking at buildings and infrastructure. And so where we are now is just on the sensitivity page. We are thinking about water threats for the next couple minutes, and then we'll be moving on to adaptive capacity. Let me know if you have any questions, but so far it seems like the group has been using more independent, quiet work time, and I'm just here for questions and discussion. So we'll give everybody another 2 minutes on the water threats, but please speak up if you need more time. All right, again, feel free to stay on the section you're working on if you need some more time, but I want to move us along for those who are ready to the next section, which is adaptive capacity. So if you click next on the survey tool, it'll take you to the next page, which has the context for what we're going to be talking about with this section. So in the sort of opposite side of the vulnerability coin from sensitivity, what we want to think about with adaptive capacity is even if there is a threat that impacts a certain asset, how able is that asset or system to adapt to that threat? Whether it's just that it's fine because it is a thing that can just stand there and get flooded and wet and it won't face any damage, or it is something that has some sort of built-in resilience. So this isn't as common for a community like Richmond, but in like coastal communities, we might have things that are on stilts, let's say. So similar to the sensitivity activity, what we ask you to do with this section is to rate the asset types relative to each other, what you think their adaptive capacity to heat and water threats are. So I'm just going to give, now that you all are familiar with how this tool, the SurveyMonkey tool, is set up, maybe 10 minutes to do this whole thing, and you all just let me know what questions you have. With heat threats, again, we're thinking about extreme temperatures, extended heat waves. So with that in mind, for the adaptive capacity scores, let's think about, okay, for a certain asset, I'll just use hospitals as an example. Even if we are under, an unprecedented heat wave, we have temperatures that are 95 degrees or more for a week in a row. Does that asset, a hospital building, have built-in, resilience to deal with that threat? To me, I think so. You all might have different opinions because I am not an expert in any kind of building anything. And then similarly with water threats, we're thinking about, okay, a flood is probably the easiest scenario to think about. with something like a community center. If there is a flood of any, kind of depth, that we want to think about that impacts a community center, is it able to just naturally on its own bounce back or recover from that event? Probably not in my mind, because there would need to be some sort of remediation of the damage that occurs for the flood. So I might rank that as somewhat able to, I might rank that as a 2 out of 3 or something. You all feel free to use your own expertise and judgment on those decisions. So any questions about adaptive capacity? If not, we will give you all a few minutes to work on this section.
Brianne, this is Andrew. I have a question and then a comment.
Yeah.
Should we be considering these assets in their current state, or do they have the potential to be adaptive?
Yes, current state, great question. So especially for a city like Richmond, where we know that some of our infrastructure is older, I'm thinking back to what Marshall kind of talked through in the beginning of our meeting about what is the existing sort of condition of our assets. Like, are they already facing any kind of chronic issues that would make them less able to deal with an additional threat like a heat wave or a flood or something? So take that into consideration without getting too into the weeds of like a specific hospital or community center being,
Sure.
in a certain condition. Does that help?
Yeah, perfect. And then the other question is, it sort of has to do with the interrelatedness of all these things, because it might be that my fire station is itself, Armageddon ready, but because what it does is respond to emergencies in other facilities, it is therefore highly affected by emergencies, say at an affordable housing facility or at a hospital. So, I'm sort of checking, as I went down the last one, everything's highly susceptible because all these things are so interrelated.
Yes, and that is, yes, all of this stuff, none of this exists in a vacuum. We are a city of systems. So you're actually getting a little bit more into what we might think about in the final part of our activity, which is consequence. So, that's beyond just this asset itself. If it were to be impacted by something, how does that affect the community, public safety, public health, sort of the external impacts beyond just the building as we're thinking about it right now? So for adaptive capacity, probably think more about just the thing. And then once we get into the consequence in the next section, we'll be thinking about how critical that thing is to our city, to services that relate to natural environment, people, public safety, other things like that.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Dawn, how's the other group going?
The other group is great, and I was trying to sneak in here and ask Bob Stone if he could come over to the energy group, because we would love to have his DPU knowledge, but he might have stepped away. I tried to privately chat him.
I'm here.
Oh, hey, Bob. Would that be okay if I grabbed you?
Sure.
Brought you over? All right,
Okay.
Thanks, guys.
So I'll give you all, let's see, let me check on my time. Probably 5 more minutes on adaptive capacity, because again, the next section is the most detailed and complex. So we definitely want to leave plenty of time for that. You all let me know though, if you would like more time on this adaptive capacity section. curious for anyone who is sort of wrapping up, has anyone ever been part of any kind of activity related to like threat planning and this kind of stuff, even if it's not related to climate change? No, I haven't.
Yeah,
Ed, you have. Doug, you have.
yeah. It's a big part of our job these days.
Yeah.
Lots of threats out there to utility infrastructure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. All right, I'll give you all 2 more minutes. All right, feel free to stay where you are, as always, if you need more time, but for those who are ready, please feel free to click over to the next and last page in our SurveyMonkey tool for this assessment, which deals with consequence. So as a reminder, consequence is the piece of our vulnerability analysis that is thinking about what the potential consequences or repercussions of a climate impact affecting an asset to the point where it's a total failure, asset failure, system failure. And we think about this just to make it easier on ourselves so we don't have to think about, okay, it was a minor flood versus a really heavy flood. For this exercise, what we want to think about is worst case scenario. For most of these assets, I think there might be all buildings, but for this building, it goes down, whatever that means. It has been impacted by a flood so substantial that the building is unsafe and unusable for some amount of time that it takes to be remediated. And so with that worst case scenario in mind, we want to think about for each of our asset types, what the potential, impact to other sectors that could have. And I'll go through these again, but you'll see that the SurveyMonkey page for this is set up differently from the last two, and that's because we want to think in a little bit more detail for each asset about the potential impacts. So it's sorted, it's set up so that you have the considerations for consequence for each asset type. And we have, I think, about 12 assets or so in this group. So at the top of the SurveyMonkey page is our guide to thinking about each of these areas of consequence. We also have a little scoring guide that you can reference if you would like. Again, I think this is the area where we have the potential to get the most detailed information if you know and would like to provide that either in your scoring or in the comments, or if just generally, this is how I think this could be impacted. So what we're looking at for each asset is considering a total loss or failure. What is the geographic area of that loss? So for something like a public school, we would think that that is, you know, potentially a neighborhood. If it's a high school, probably more than one council district, something like that. How long is the loss? So for this, we can think about, you know, catastrophic flood event. How long would it take to get that thing back up online? Because we're looking at buildings in this group, I would imagine most of these are probably in the higher categories, just because it would take a while, I imagine, to remediate most of these from the damage of a catastrophic flood. We're also looking at the literal cost of the damage. So how much it would cost to bring this building back online. That's information we know not everyone, you know, has on at the tips of their fingers. So feel free to either estimate or indicate that you're not sure. And then the last 4 areas or 5 areas of consequence are to other city systems. So we want to think about, you know, how critical that asset is to public safety, economic activities, public health, vulnerable populations, which is defined in many ways, but we want to think about those who are disproportionately impacted already by things like climate change, particularly Black and African American and Hispanic and Latino and lower income communities who might depend more heavily on that piece of critical infrastructure. And then lastly, thinking about the natural environment and whether there are potentially any impacts there, which probably on the building side, probably pretty low for most of these. But again, you all provide your knowledge and judgments on that. And then you'll see for each asset category, we also have a comments box. So if you are not sure about something or just want to provide some additional, more detailed input, feel free to put your thoughts there. That is the extent that I have for like an overview of this portion of the activity. We're going to give you more time to do this. And then this is actually the end of our breakout activity. So you all let me know what questions you have, what you'd like to discuss, and any comments that you want to share with the group. So hearing no initial questions, I will stay here the whole time. You all feel free to voice anything you would like. If you would like to step away, if you finish this part of the activity, please come back at 12:45. I will actually be right back in the breakout room in 1 second.
Before we move on, if everyone could sort of, if you haven't been doing this already, go back to the sort of the survey. When you go to the survey, you'll see there's a ranking again from 1 to 3, low to high, for sensitivity to heat threats and sensitivity to water threats, and also a place to put in comments. So if there's anything you want to add that you haven't said that you'd like to add here, please do that. Ran, what happened to your buildings group?
Oh, I was just popping in to say hi. The buildings group is working very dutifully and silently. So I wanted to see how it was going over here in terms of
We're
time.
mostly just talking, I feel like.
Okay.
But maybe that's because I haven't been emphasizing the survey enough.
Oh, well, all right.
I just put the link in the chat again for anyone who lost track of that survey.
Okay. Wanted to do a check-in on time as well.
Yeah.
What part of the activity
We
are you
finished
on?
sensitivity. We're moving on to adaptive capacity. So
Okay, we're going to finish a little early, so I'll probably just, invite folks back to the main room, and then y'all just come back in whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Cool.
Marshall, I've got a quick question. I don't know,
Yeah.
know how much this.
All right. Hey, Kenny, thanks for joining us. Just curious, were you in the other group, or are you joining the meeting just now?
I'm just kind of joining everything just now.
Got it. No worries at all. What I'm going to do, are you able to access the chat for the meeting?
I believe so.
Okay, perfect. I just put a link in the chat. The 2 breakout groups are in slightly different places. So if you want to click on that link, what this is a tool that we are asking folks to fill out during this time in the meeting. Okay. Essentially, what we are doing is looking at a list of types of built infrastructure and buildings that are in the city and evaluating how they might be impacted by climate change threats, namely heat waves, high temperatures, as well as flooding and extreme precipitation. If you have any questions, please let me know. But what we're doing in this group is we're now on the 3rd page, which is consequence. If you'd like, you can just go through the tool, and it should be all the information is there for you. And just let me know, sorry, as you have questions.
Okay.
And just to let this group know, the energy breakout group is one step behind us. Sounds like they're doing a lot of talking. So what we'll do now is still spend a couple more minutes wrapping up the consequence activity. We can really take another really 10 or 15 minutes if y'all would like. I'm here for any questions. If anyone is interested, you could pop into that other group by leaving this breakout room if you're interested in joining that discussion. Otherwise, once folks are done with our survey tool, just let me know, and we can go back out to the main room for some reflection. I'm just looking at the survey responses. It looks like we have 7 people who have finished our group survey, which is awesome. Again, if you'd like, feel free to exit this breakout room. You'll be directed back to the main room with Wendy, and if you want, she can pop you into the other breakout room if you're interested in hearing the discussion about the energy assets. Otherwise, feel free to hang here with me for a few more minutes. All right, we're going to take another minute or so for those who would like more time on the consequence activity. And you have access to this, so feel free to keep working on it throughout the rest of the meeting. but we do want to come back together at, let's say, 12:45 for a bit of group reflection, and then we will rejoin the rest of the meeting. For those of you who are not on camera, if you give me a thumbs up in the Zoom reactions or just type in the chat, I'm here, we'll get started on a group reflection. Thanks, Fred. Thanks, Doug. Thanks, Ed. Thanks, Adam and Kenny. Awesome. Okay. And Kenny, I know you might need more time, so feel free to continue working and letting me know if you have any questions. Since we have a little bit of time, and thank you all so much for going through that activity. Today, this is going to be really helpful information for the next step in the RVAgreen 2050 process, which is taking this and drafting strategies to help our community become more resilient. So we appreciate all of your input. For now, what we want to do is think about in a little more broader sense and get your thoughts on climate resilience more generally. And now that we have gone through information related to climate change and its impacts in Virginia and here in Richmond, thinking about your area of work or priorities, what do you see as being the greatest vulnerability or risk, in this area? So anyone who would like to is welcome to kick us off. And if not, I can share some thoughts. All right, quiet group today, which is fine. We have a new president, so that's exciting. I know as I think about climate change and how it's impacting Richmond, I've been thinking a lot about the impacts to people and particularly public health, and what assets are available to folks in the event of some sort of event like a heat wave, which are getting more frequent. How are people able to get to the critical services that they need, especially if they don't own a vehicle? Are they walking to bus stops to wait in the sun during the middle of the day to get somewhere that they need to go for something like dialysis or some other health treatment or something like that? So that's been something I've been thinking about, is the human impacts. Did anything else come up for you all today relevant to your work that you feel comfortable sharing around climate change and its potential impacts to our community? Daniel, if you have any thoughts, don't want to put you on the spot, but want to include you in the conversation as well.
I've just sort of been thinking more about the storm and, tropical storm-like impacts here in Richmond. So, considering that recent research has shown that, tropical storms and systems are, dumping on average more rainfall, and also the fact that they're on average moving in a slower pace, allowing more and more rainfall to just naturally collect. You know, are our buildings and stuff equipped to handle that kind of rainfall and, you know, potential erosional impacts or, you know, prolonged rain events?
Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
When I think when you come to that topic, some interesting kind of things are being done throughout the country. As far as, you know, it's not as simple as just, oh, just build bigger pipes that will drain the water out, because, you know, naturally they just meander along, and it's still kind of a slow process to pull the water out from the streets and the ground. So some cities are actually developing ways to almost make their cities like a sponge more so. And I know people want to say just do more green space. That's part of it. But, you know, like an example, Philadelphia is subsidizing residents there who take away their asphalt or concrete driveway and patios and replace it with like a permeable type tile, so that the water actually does pull and stay into the ground a little bit slower instead of just running right off into the street. So it doesn't tax their wastewater systems. You know, other cities like in North Carolina, there's a city where they had an issue with a roadway that's flooding. So what they did was build these kind of like landscape islands out off the side of the roads that are filled with, you know, kind of expensive soil and sand, where the water will drain off and it holds there for a while without running right into the waterways as quick. So, I mean, I think there's approaches to try to fix that, but it, you know, the toughest part is just the resources that are going to be devoted to doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Fred. Those are two great examples.
You know, another thing that, you know, has occurred to me, which I guess my bigger thing is more on the energy point of view. But I guess my biggest thing is, you know, how are our low income housing, you know, developments, are they going to be, you know, are their AC systems equipped to handle higher, you know, temperature events or more extreme heat events? And, you know, if they do have, you know, decent enough AC units, what is the you know, what is the pull on the grid? You know, what kind of, you know, issues are we going to see on the grid, because, you know, so many more people are pulling so much power off the grid?
I think that comes to, you know, a couple of things. One would be, if it's an older building, you can put the best AC system that you want in there, and it's still going to waste a lot of air.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you probably have to devote some resource to retrofitting a lot of these older buildings and making them run more efficiently, so that whatever AC system you put in, even if it's an efficient system, it actually runs better and pulls less electricity. But there's the other challenge of going through a lot of these older buildings and getting them, you know, up to current conditions, and that's a huge undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you all for sharing. Any other general reflections? We have just a minute or so before we're going to rejoin the full group.
Hi, this is Andrew. I'm going to jump in quick. I've got a terrible internet connection today, and
No worries.
So what I'm thinking about here is, and I've heard it alluded to a few times, and sorry if I'm repeating again.
Andrew, your audio cut out. If you want to try turning off your video, that might improve the audio quality.
And to a greater degree operable when the power's out during an emergency. And so to that end, we need to have strict as possible on the energy side as soon as possible, so that we are, you know, creating buildings that are more, that, you know, save money, save energy, and also increase our community's resilience, because they don't need that AC right away because they're super insulated, for example, and they have fresh air systems that could run on a a tiny battery or and which gets the other point of it's a broader net zero package for a bit where there is power supply on site by distributed solar by and large, which we can also do a lot more of with today's technology at today's prices. I mean, the big for me is within reach if we make policy choices like that.